Good afternoon if you're in Germany, good morning if you're in the US, and whatever time it is, wherever else you might be, welcome to this American Academy online discussion on unprecedented indictment, a world of political turmoil. I'm Daniel Benjamin. I'm the president of the American Academy in Berlin, and I'm delighted that you can join us. If records were kept for such things, we might well find that former President Donald Trump was the most litigious man in American history. At the time of his election, it was widely reported that he had been involved in more than 3,000 lawsuits. All of that, however, is essentially insignificant compared to the legal trouble he has now. There are at least 4 criminal investigations underway into Trump's actions before, during, and after his presidency. Tomorrow in New York City, a set of criminal indictments, reportedly more than 30, will be unsealed, related, we believe, to the hush money that was paid to porn star Stormy Daniels to keep her account of her affair with Trump out of the news. And let me just pause there and confess that I never thought that I would use the word porn star in an American Academy event. In the course of its nearly 250-year history, the U.S. has seen many senior officials convicted of crimes, including perhaps at the top of the list, Vice President Spiro Agnew, who was convicted of a single count of felony tax evasion in 1973 and forced to resign from office. But before Trump, we have never had a current or former president indicted. News of the indictments last week created a media tsunami, with Trump himself denouncing Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg as a racist and accusing the judge in the case of hating him. The large majority of Republican office holders have denounced the charges as politically motivated. Republicans in the House of Representatives have taken the unprecedented step of saying they will investigate this local prosecution and are threatening to subpoena Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. The indictment has further roiled the race for Republican nomination for the presidency, in which Trump is the front runner. So there is much more to mention, but at this point, I'd like to introduce our 2 guests today, both of them outstanding experts who will break down the legal process and help us understand what indeed just happened and what are the ramifications of this development for American politics. First, let me introduce Harry Litman. I'm going alphabetically from LI to LU. Joining us from Southern California, Harry has long experience at the Department of Justice and is a former U.S. attorney in Western Pennsylvania, as well as a former Deputy Assistant Attorney General. He teaches constitutional law and national security law at the University of California at Los Angeles School of Law and the University of California at San Diego Department of Political Science. He also practices law with Constantine Cannon in San Francisco, specializing in the False Claims Act. Those of you who watch television, American television, will be familiar with Harry because he is a regular commentator on MSNBC, CNN, and Fox News. He is also the creator and executive producer of the outstanding podcast, Talking Feds, which brings together former federal officials to talk about the key issues of the day. Edward Luce is the U.S. national editor and columnist at the Financial Times. And before that, he was the newspaper's Washington bureau chief, South Asia bureau chief, capital markets editor, and Philippines correspondent. He is the author of 3 highly acclaimed books: The Retreat of Western Liberalism, Time to Start Thinking, America in the Age of Dissent, and In Spite of the Gods, The Strange Rise of Modern India. And he too is a fixture on American television and British television as well, appearing regularly on CNN, NPR, MSNBC's Morning Joe, and the BBC. He is also the co-author of the Swamp Notes newsletter, which covers the intersection of money, power, and politics in America. I want to thank both Harry and Ed for joining us on very short notice. We are, if we hew to our plan, going to talk for about 40 minutes. We'll take questions from the audience. So please feel free to start sending your questions in now, and I apologize in advance if I can't get to all of them. Harry, let me start with you on the legal issues. The indictments in New York City have yet to be unsealed. But tell us the basics of this case, and if you can briefly, and I know there's an enormous amount to cover, outline the other legal perils that Donald Trump faces in Georgia, Washington, and other locales as appropriate.
Sure. As you say, they're kind of panoramic. I just wanted to thank you first, Dan, for having me. I've learned more about the American Academy over the last several days. It's really a remarkable institution, and thanks, Ed, for joining. So, in brief, yes, 30-some counts we're hearing. The indictment has been sealed until tomorrow. That number is a little bit deceptive. We know from the basic Stormy Daniels scheme that the payout of $130,000 to her was then kind of laundered, you might say, as legal fees in 11 different installments to Michael Cohen. And I'm anticipating each of those 11 giving rise to possibly 3 different violations: tax, financial, and campaign finance, and atop them all, a conspiracy count. And I think it's important that Bragg will probably conceptualize it not just as a payout to Stormy Daniels, but an ongoing scheme that begins in 2015 with an agreement between Trump and the head of the National Enquirer to, in fact, smother claims like this that would come out of the woodwork, and continuing into the White House when Trump is still signing the check. So it's less this sort of accounting error, or even a single payout to a porn. A lot of these you're hearing porn star, as Dan said, in the same sentence as untested legal theory, which is not the presentation you want. But I also think it's a distortion of what we're going to see tomorrow. Briefly, there are 3 other criminal cases and also a welter of civil cases circulating around the former president. So in Fulton County, Georgia, you have a serious indictment that is sort of a microcosm of all the January 6 crimes, but involving Georgia-specific behavior, where Trump tries to browbeat officials into essentially lying about the results in Georgia. And then the Department of Justice itself investigating 2 sets of crimes. One, a number of different ones arising from January 6th and culminating in the actual melee that Trump may bear criminal responsibility for. And the other, and I would say the most serious, imminently anyway, of the 4, the document, the obstruction of the demand for return of classified documents that did not belong to Trump, from that he was holding at Mar-a-Lago, as to which there's even recent evidence just today about his obstructive activity. So that's the very quick survey of what potentially awaits Donald Trump.
Well, Ed, you have opined on this, so I'm going to ask you this first, but I'd like to hear from both of you. The New York charges deal with some tawdry behavior that preceded the 2016 election. They do not have anything to do with Trump trying to overturn the 2020 election. They do not have anything to do with obstruction of justice in the Mueller investigation, which was something we kept hearing was going to be prosecuted. They do not have to do with the documents case. And as we're all former U.S. government employees, since Ed worked for Larry Summers at one point at the Treasury Department. And we all know how serious it is to mishandle classified information. Is this the right charge at the right time? What's your view? I'm going to turn to you after this, Harry, because I think you have something to say on it as well.
Look, I think of all the 4 sort of broad categories that Harry laid out so well, this is clearly the most trivial. Or the least grave, might be another way of putting it. And it would be, if Trump could choose the ground on which he would be indicted from a selection of those 4, this would be it. It's going to be quite hard, I think, for Americans to understand the novelty of the legal theory. We haven't, of course, seen Bragg's indictment. It's remained sealed till tomorrow, but we can, I think, safely assume they will know it is about a porn star, and they will know it's about Trump paying hush money. And, you know, Americans have known Trump for a very long time, you know, really since the 1970s. The New York Post has got a whole specialism of Trump coverage and Trump sex scandals, usually fed to them by Trump himself. And so, you know, that of the four sort of great indictments is I think the most trivial. But I would imagine that there are going to be other indictments. And, you know, I can't be sure of that, but it looks like, and Harry will give a much more grounded opinion here, but it looks like the Fulton County, Georgia grand jury, you know, is reaching something near to a conclusion. And there are two active grand juries in Washington, D.C. that Jack Smith, the special counsel, convened. So we're probably going to get other indictments, and therefore this debate about, you know, which indictment to begin with might come to seem irrelevant pretty quickly. Yeah. But there is quite a, not abstruse, but there is quite a complicated novel legal theory here that would link the business falsification that Trump carried out with his payments to his lawyer, Michael Cohen, to reimburse him for paying the hush money to Stormy Daniels, linking that to an underlying felony, and whether that felony is multiple ones, like federal felony, that is campaign finance violation, tax fraud, whatever it might be, that's going to require some explaining. And so just purely from a political point of view, when you're explaining, you're losing.
Right. Harry, what do you think about these charges, and whether they should be the ones in, you know, that are the first over the line, as it were? And relatedly, one of your former colleagues, or maybe he was after your time, who was a U.S. attorney, wrote in the New York Times that this was a missed opportunity for the Department of Justice to actually coordinate the different prosecutions. And I'd be curious what you think about that.
So let me just start with the first question. I quite agree with Ed. It is the least central to the essential wickedness of Trump as president. But I think he also urges us the exact right vantage point. We should think about this in a few months down the line, where there have been other charges brought, and that this is first out of the gate will be kind of a happenstance, especially since I doubt that it will be last. You know, it's going to take a long time to come to fruition. On the point that you just raised, I know people are saying that, but going back again, you know, it's important to be, as the point I've just made, but also for here, in the mindset of the time. And Garland takes office, he's very concerned with righting the ship at DOJ, which really has experienced a lot of turmoil in the Bill Barr years. And I think his basic mindset is to try not to relitigate the past. One could question that, but coming in immediately after the inauguration and bringing charges based on the Stormy Daniels events, I think could have been a really bad blunder. And so I don't agree with the critics who make that point. It's just too easy to make now. So you know, in any event, though, we need to think about not who's first out of the gate, but who will first come to a jury trial. I doubt it will be this case.
So let me redirect this question a little. I think you explained why Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice didn't take on the Stormy Daniels case in 2021. I think that the other question, though, is should the Department of Justice have been involved in talking to the different local jurisdictions and saying, you know, it's a mistake to have that one go first, or is that just not something DOJ does?
Yeah, so this is a really important point that might be unfamiliar to some in your audience. You know, we are this federal system, and the 50 states are sovereigns. And the DOJ could be involved in talks, but they don't tell New York whether to bring charges to vindicate injury to New York. Same thing with Fulton County. And that goes, I mean, the premise of the previous question was a little bit, here we are with the table spread in front of us, and we pick this card or that, but it's not that case because there are different decision makers actually opting for one or other at their own timing. So the department, I think, has been involved in speaking to them, but it would be unlawful, but also completely contrary to norms to be telling New York when it can bring its charges, and ditto with Fulton County.
Do you want to just for a moment speculate, and I'm guessing that there's a pretty good idea out there now, what this novel legal theory is, just very briefly?
Yeah, so first, how, Ed properly, well, not properly, he calls it abstruse, et cetera. An important point here is that the same DA had this case in front of him when he entered office a year ago and shied away from it. And so the legal theory that he was entertaining and rejected then may not be the same thing as we see tomorrow. It's the first thing I'm going to be looking at. But in brief, the mischaracterization of the paper records is a layup or a penalty kick, maybe, as a misdemeanor violation. But as Ed suggests, it elevates to a felony if it's done in order to further another crime. So the big question, what other crime? A possibility that suggests itself, which was in the offing a year ago, is a campaign finance violation, that this money was really to further Trump's campaign fortunes and camouflage because he needed to hide it from the American people, etc. There are others, however, that might be better grounded, and one would be a potential tax violation. The money is all, we're told, rounded up to make Michael Cohen whole and reimburse him not just for the money he paid, but for taxes on it. So there could be hanky-panky of more sort of orthodox financial variety that would make it better grounded, less abstruse. And certainly that was the prime or one of two prime lookouts of Bragg in rebuilding this case, the other being shoring up the credibility of Cohen. So I think we need to wait until tomorrow to see if this is really on soft or even untrod ground. He might have come up with a way involving the scheme I laid out as opposed to the single violation that makes it have better kind of precedent.
So moving along, you have both suggested that this is going to be the opening of what could be floodgates. Do you have any doubt that we will see indictments coming out of the investigation in Atlanta and the investigations at the Department of Justice?
And you want to take that first, or I, whatever you say, Dan?
I think you're better at answering that question,
Okay.
Harry.
Fine. No, yes. I have no doubt that we'll see Fulton County. I'm coming to have, including as of just with the recent news I averted to about obstruction, no doubt that we'll see an indictment with the Mar-a-Lago documents. The January 6th set of cases, which Smith has made substantial progress on in recent weeks, is A, so sprawling, and B, will almost certainly be last, at which point the, again, trying to predict what it'll feel like at that time. If he's been totally beaten up or a sort of some rough peace has been made where he is, a pariah to the political system going forward, I could see that one not going forward, notwithstanding that it really is dead center bullseye of his, essential wickedness, as I've said, as a president. And it's a tough case to make for different reasons. So yes, no.
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was no, yes.
Right. Okay. Ed, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, we shouldn't forget there is this separate case later this month, I believe, brought to him, a civil charge by E. Jean Carroll who alleged that he raped her in a Manhattan department store in the 1990s, and then subsequently libeled her. And I don't know the ins and outs, or whether he will be required or agree to or want to appear on the witness stand. Generally, if there's a witness stand or any stand, he likes to appear, or regardless of what lawyers advise him. So we could be getting a whole separate parallel sex scandal, and worse, starting in a New York courtroom drama near you quite soon. So we shouldn't overlook that.
Can I make a very quick follow-up point to that, Dan? So there's been some suggestion that, Governor DeSantis of Florida would prevent his extradition, or he wouldn't show up. Can't happen among other reasons, for what Ed just said, because if he doesn't show up tomorrow and then there's an arrest warrant for him, if he's got to show up for E. Jean Carroll, or he'll get a default judgment against him for that whole case. So he, his best case scenario, if he tries to evade, is he either shows up or takes a multi-million-dollar default settlement. And when he shows up, if he's evaded for any reason, they nab him with an arrest warrant. That won't. So that's one of several reasons I think we will see him for sure show up for the arraignment at 2:15 New York time tomorrow.
So as you both already indicated, Trump is a unique defendant, and he is already doing things that no attorney would ever allow another client to do. After the arraignment tomorrow, he will be giving an address, presumably to the nation as a former president, on the case. And, lawyers will, at least on TV, they always tell their clients never to say anything. And I think that's probably pretty routine practice. He has posted a picture of himself on social media with a baseball bat next to a picture of District Attorney Alvin Bragg, seemingly threatening violence. He has also, been calling all of his followers to protest in language not unlike what we saw before January 6th. So I'm just wondering, aren't there legal consequences to this kind of behavior? I mean, aren't we at the point where the judicial system bumps up against Donald Trump's efforts to turn everything into a political or public opinion matter? Harry, maybe you want to take a whack at that one with your baseball bat.
As it were, yeah. Well, so the short answer is yes, and you put it exactly right, Dan. The judicial system bumps up. People, I think, know about the robust First Amendment protections in the country, and most of his statements wouldn't be crimes in and of themselves, because you have a very high threshold of their being designed to provoke imminent and immediate danger, and they probably wouldn't. Although, we could well get an attack from someone on Bragg or the judge, whom he very outrageously said railroaded him before and hates him, and that would be a total a tsunami of its own. But here's the thing: he is really playing with fire in a way I don't think he understands, because both of his chief antagonists here, the DA and the judge, have potential nuclear bombs to dump on him. So first, you're right. I think you're dead on to say the judicial system, because even though he couldn't be criminalized for the statements themselves, the Judge Merchant, who was also the judge in the Trump Organization criminal case, has authority to safeguard the trial and the judicial process. And the second big point of drama everyone will watch for tomorrow is, does he impose a gag order on Trump? It'll be, if he does, very tempered, very careful to try to to give proper room for someone who's after all the lead candidate for one party for the presidential nomination. But for example, he could say you can no longer call people out by name and those sorts of things. And that gag order is the first step. If Trump continues in his Trumpian way to be obstreperous, the only thing that can happen that the judge can eventually do that, he'll warn him again, say, I really mean it, Mr. Trump. But then he'll say, you do this again, I'm putting you in jail for contempt. And you know, that's got to be the complete nightmare for Trump. And he can really do it. And indeed, if Trump keeps challenging him, he almost has to. That's on that side. Second, on the DA side, even though it's not, you wouldn't criminalize the statements themselves, you could actually get him for obstruction of government administration now that a case is pending. That's a crime in New York, trying to mess with this particular case, say corrupt the jury pool. And the killer point about that, it's not eligible for bail in New York. If he's simply charged, if a grand jury simply returns that indictment, he must go to jail until trial. There's no conditions under law they can give him. So either of these guys really does have the ultimate drop on him in a way that if he doesn't realize, and if he doesn't come to heel, not a position that Donald Trump likes to be in, has ever been in, he's really risking actually going into a prison, and that's got to be, can you imagine the indignity for him of that?
And I'd like to turn a bit more to things that are sort of more in your remit. It has been said that the American judicial system faces a stress test and trying in a courtroom, Donald Trump. But I wonder if this isn't even more true of our political system, because this is perforce an enormous political drama, and one that seems to be aimed at the legitimacy of our institutions, because the Republicans are really questioning the fundamentals of rule of law and of having, the leader of their party indicted. I mean, what's it look like from there in Washington?
I think a lot of people are surprised by the degree to which Republicans have fallen into line to essentially say this is a weaponized indictment. This is a deep state, crooked motive indictment, that there's a witch hunt going on, echoing Trump's language about what Alvin Bragg has done. And even Republicans, for example, Bill Cassidy, the Republican senator from Louisiana, he voted to convict Trump in the second impeachment. So he's already, crossed that Rubicon and taken on Trump. Even he has been criticizing this indictment as biased and weaponized. So it is remarkable the degree to which, if we're talking about a stress test for American democracy, one of its two great parties is essentially lining up behind the contention that, well, no man is above the rule of law except this one, except Trump.
And I guess particularly troubling to me is to see Congress trying to, in the form of, House Judiciary Chair Jim Jordan, for example, threatening Alvin Bragg. I mean, it's unheard of.
Threatening to arrest him. Of course, he has no powers to arrest him, but also to defund, the DOJ, the FBI, to both investigate them for alleged deep state collusion, whatever it is they come up with, but also to defund these federal law enforcement agencies. Again, this is new territory. This isn't sort of half-hearted, let's sort of issue weasel-worded statements supporting Trump because we're scared of him. This is going whole hog behind Trump's challenge to the rule of law. And so I think that's a very dangerous situation to be in. Many of these characters, I know, everybody knows in this town, talks to every now and then, know full well, they know better. They have different views in private. than what they are saying in public. And that is, well, on the first sort of human level, a measure of some spinelessness and lack of courage amongst a lot of elected Republicans. But it's also a barometer of the degree to which Trump still, after everything that has happened, and increasingly, in fact, has the party in his grip. And the sort of the best measure of that is, of course, Ron DeSantis, who is his chief rival, who Trump has been sort of preemptively attacking. He hasn't yet declared his candidacy, but he will, Ron DeSantis. Even Ron DeSantis, who has an opportunity here to say, look, let's move beyond the drama of Trump, and, you know, have somebody with Trumpian policies, but a more respectable, you know, record and of competence and of probity. Even he fell behind Trump and accused Alvin Bragg and so forth, the whole system, of being weaponized and biased. So that is a measure ultimately of the degree to which this party is in Trump's pocket still.
And it will be fascinating to see if they stay with those talking points when the jury in Atlanta, well, the grand jury in Atlanta, or the district attorney in Atlanta, if she hands up indictments, and if the Department of Justice hands up indictments, because this is just, you know, it seems like a step of commitment on their part, and they may not be able to back out. And you know, one of the questions, and Harry, jump in here anytime if you want. You know, one of the incredible things is that you know, it is the famous Trump base that no one wants to alienate, because it appears that the politics are impossible. You can't get the nomination without the Trump base, and you probably can't get elected with it. Or it would take a politician of greater gifts than we are currently seeing today, who could actually, you know, steer the party out of the kind of cul-de-sac it's in right now. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, what a Gordian knot there. And just to give a measure of their sort of steadfastness and hypocrisy, as Ed put it, they haven't seen the indictment, nor have any of us, and they're ready to come out of the box and call it every name in the book. You know, of course, the measure of whether it's political has to be, would this same conduct be the subject of a criminal indictment if Joe Schmo did it? And it's quite clear that it would be now. Their opposition is completely sort of substance and law free, and will remain that way. But you're completely right. How will it be tenable as things pile up? And in particular, you know, the rhetoric really is shades of January 6th. And let's say, and we already had somebody do a death threat to Bragg. Let's say there's a serious assault effort, or God forbid, an assault. Don't they have to run from him like the plague? But they are so deeply invested in the notion that all the prosecutions, and of course somehow their criticism of Bragg comes to envelop or be about Biden and Garland. It's all incoherent if you go just, you know, for 5 seconds of analysis, but they count on people's not doing that. So it's so completely divorced of anything on the law. And one final point is, look, at the end of the day, it's going to be a long day, a day when it is an extreme stress test, but the ultimate test is going to be what a jury says. And, you know, they don't have, it's not just politics, he said, she said, and just a general scrum. There's going to be a right answer here, and they're going to be on the wrong end of it, I think, in at least, you know, one or two important cases.
Ed, there's no way really to predict such things, but it does seem like people are playing with fire near a very dried out forest right now. Tucker Carlson, the most prominent of the Fox talking heads, said after the indictment something like, "Not a good day to give up your assault rifles." And so I'm wondering, you know, what does your instinct tell you about the possibility for violence here?
Yeah, it's interesting. Of course, we also have a sort of parallel side-by-side case against Fox News,
Correct.
by the Dominion voting systems that Fox alleged was involved in the stolen election, of November 2020, without any foundation. And Dominion Voting Systems is suing Fox for $1.6 billion in damages. And as part of that discovery process, billion, yes. As part of that discovery process, we have all kinds of texts and emails from the likes of Tucker Carlson, all of whom make it very clear they think Trump is lying. They think there is no basis to the stolen election charges. And yet, because their viewers want to hear it, they will continue to provide this big lie. So that is another measure. I gave one earlier of DeSantis, but that is another measure. And now we have Tucker Carlson saying, don't give up your AR-15, a military assault weapon, a semi-automatic that is designed for battlefield use, that is not, that's been involved in most of the mass shootings America has had since it lifted its ban on assault weapons in 2004. An extraordinary thing to say. Over and above that, you mentioned, Daniel, you mentioned the Truth Social post that Trump did of him with a baseball bat next to Alvin Bragg. Well, Alvin Bragg's African-American. Trump's called him an animal, a psychopath, a dangerous man. Trump has described his campaign to be district attorney as Soros funded. Now, George Soros is, of course, the stock Jewish financier of all conspiracy theorists. So we've also got a racialized element to this rhetoric coming out, as well as a sort of insurrectionist hint to some of the rhetoric. So this is deeply reckless kind of language we're hearing from the Republican Party. And even if none of this results, and God, I hope none of this results in any kind of attempt on Bragg or the judge or whatever, but even if none of this it does, this is, to a lay mind, a non-lawyer, this is criminal in itself. This is extraordinary incitement to violence.
Well, to a legal mind, is this incitement to violence?
No, because of the First Amendment high bar. If that putative assailant will be judged to be acting on her or his own. But there are 2 or 3 different ways, but certainly as right how it is socially. It's criminal in a small c way. And there are these parallels by the superintendents of the court and the potential for a charge of obstruction of government administration that take the same conduct and make it punitive, at least in a way that could wind up putting him in jail, which is, the ultimate thing, presumably, he's trying to avoid.
I have to say that this discussion, I think, is just one of many in which Europeans will be watching and wondering about our First Amendment and about about what it does for our society. And can you just quickly break down for me what you think the indictment does and doesn't do for Donald Trump politically? There have been a lot of Republicans who, in talking to the mainstream media, have said, well, you've just made him the nominee with this indictment. Is that true? Is this a rally around the leader's situation? We've anticipated this a little bit just before, but what does this do to his ability to win votes? Some Republicans seem to think that this is going to bring home wayward voters who in 2020 thought they'd had enough of Donald Trump. I'm not so sure. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it pulls in 2 opposite directions. I think it rocket boosts his chances of becoming the nominee, partly because all his rivals have missed this opportunity to differentiate themselves from him. Therefore, why would you vote for Team B when you've got Team A? Why would you, have Diet Coke when you can have the real thing? And so I think his chances of getting the nomination have been improved, at least in the short term. And that's reflected in the poll numbers. I mean, his lead over DeSantis has gone in the last month from 8 points to more than 30 points. And partly that's because of some of DeSantis's own sort of flip-floppingness before this indictment, and particularly on things like Ukraine. He can't decide whether he's a hawk on Ukraine or a dove, whether he's Trumpian or not. But we've seen since the indictment last Thursday some early polls that show Trump's lead continuing. Paradoxically, I think this actually is Joe Biden's dream scenario, is to have Trump as the nominee, a criminally indicted, multiply, possibly criminally indicted, serially criminally indicted Republican nominee of the party of law and order, who is apparently against law and order. And that I think would boost Biden's chances of, which I think are already better than 50-50, of defeating Trump in a general election. So I would see that this indictment as making him likely to be the nominee and Biden likelier to be reelected to a second term.
So let me
one quick comment on that is just, so I agree with that, and this is obviously not my bailiwick, but in addition to the racialized rhetoric he pointed out, the subject matter of this case, I think is designed to alienate that. His base might really double down, but the swath in particular of suburban women who deserted him in 2020, I don't think charges involving Stormy Daniels and payoffs to cover up affairs are well designed to attract them back to the reservation.
Yeah, no,
Can I just say one thing? Can I say one thing? The New York Post, generally Financial Times doesn't sort of speak approvingly of tabloid, Murdoch-owned tabloid, but the New York Post's headline, "The Gathering Stormy," was, I thought, particularly good.
Yeah. Yes, well, those tabloids, they invest in their headline writers, if not elsewhere. I wanted to just drill down a little bit on what you were just talking about regarding this being, a dream situation in a sense for Biden. I don't think there are any real dreams for anyone running the U.S. these days. There's only getting through the mess. But a very savvy European said to me recently, these charges are silly and there may be more important charges in the offing, but this is a reflection of the Democrats' profound desire to run against Trump. And that's why they're working so hard to get all these charges out. What would be your response to that, Harry?
They're not working to get these charges. People, really don't understand. They're so very quick to just blanket the political system of Democrats with one cover. It's just not, there's no way in which Merrick Garland is thinking those thoughts. And perhaps now basically there are people who are thinking them, but they are not making the actual decisions as to who's going to be indicted or not. And just on the basic proposition, it would seem this way, but man, once burned, twice shy. And I think it's right that his nomination chance have been much increased. And I'm just thinking of something bad happens to the economy, or God forbid to Biden himself, and now you have a weakened Democrat against this historical monster, and the consequences of somehow his being re-elevated to the presidency, not just all the damage he'll do, but just the sort of national judgment and what it looks like for the country, how deeply sort of shameful, etc. So I still have night sweats a bit from my trauma of 2016, but it does seem to me they should handily be able to defeat him, but stuff happens.
Yeah, and we do have this odd institution, the Electoral College, which makes everything wholly unpredictable. So let me go to some of the questions from the audience. We've got a number of good ones. Someone writes in, I may be naive here, but surely the staff involved in the New York City prosecutions are tough, seasoned, and savvy enough to know exactly what is at stake legally and politically. They know the risks to themselves professionally if they botch this. They've gamed out the outcomes. and still decided to move forward. Is there any sense that this team could be in over its collective head? Harry, that seems like it's got your name on it.
Yeah. Short answer is no. I mean, they have sussed it. I totally agree. When Bragg, having previously stepped away from it, decided to go forward, it was with, the earnest idea of doing it. Should the case somehow go awry, he's a one-term DA. Of course, if it succeeds, he's probably a new Robert Morgenthau. But yeah, they've made that calculation.
For
and
about
that's
40
why.
years, right?
Say it again.
You should explain to our audience.
I'm sorry, who was the institutional serve for life Manhattan DA, even though it's an elected position. But that's one of the reasons that I think let's hold off until tomorrow to see how abstruse this legal theory is, because that was, something that was the big challenge for him. And yes, if he flubs this one, a very public, humiliation. So I think it's a well taken point.
So
and one more quick thing. They also know with all this language and threats, they've got to totally wear blinders and keep their eyes on the prize, but they can't talk during this time. They're going to face outrageous incoming from Trump and the like, and there's no response. Then they can't be in the political fray. So the emotional challenge, I've been in cases that are fraud, nothing like this, of course, of really keeping the blinkers on they're real professionals, some which were brought in just for this prosecution, but that's a challenge.
Well, speaking of being in over your head, Donald Trump goes through lawyers the way other people go through paper cups, and
except other people pay for the paper cups typically.
Yeah, well, and of course, his legendary habit of not paying his lawyers has certainly diminished the universe of people who would work for him. Now, all the big white-collar defense firms have said thanks, no thanks to him. Can he still find lawyers who are up to the task here?
One. So yeah, his current guy on TV, Tacopina, is in the Trump mold, unsophisticated, brassy, very unimpressive. But he has a courtroom lawyer who was the same person who defended the Trump organization, and she's thoughtful, savvy, not a crazy kind of flag waver. She's good, and he has her for this.
And it must be it's the bonfire of the vanities for a reporter in Washington now, no?
Right.
This we're not going to be bored. I mean, I have to say, it's not like we have been bored,
Right.
but we're going to be more than busy. It's season 6 of America is becoming quite improbable.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question. It's a bit of a bit outside the lane of what we've been talking about, but very much in the lane of what Europeans are concerned about. What will the impact of the Trump turmoil be on Republicans' behavior towards the debt limit? And will it endanger military aid for Ukraine, which is a big concern in Berlin and elsewhere?
Both very, very good and germane questions. Very good questions. So a questioner obviously knows that the Republicans, are refusing to negotiate over budgets, over tax bills and spending bills, etc., unless Biden, first of all, negotiates their terms and conditions for renewing the debt ceiling. And the debt ceiling is, of course, these are debts that America has already incurred. It's not about future debts. This is like saying, we've got this credit card bill and I don't think we really want to pay it. And so Biden is refusing to talk on that basis to Republicans, saying it should be an automatic thing that you increase the debt limit. The Trump indictment raises the temperature hugely and makes it more difficult to find a way of avoiding that oncoming car. It's just going to sort of pollute the atmosphere between Republicans and Democrats more. Trump's position on Ukraine, and he sort of doubled down on that in a recent television interview, is that Putin's going to win. He's going to take all of Ukraine. That's a supposed forecast, but there's also some Putin philia. There's some admiration of Putin mixed in with that. When, if you recall, Putin first invaded Ukraine, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February last year, Trump said it would be over within 48 hours. His position now is that if he becomes president, he will solve the problem in 24 hours. There'll be no more war 24 hours after he becomes president. And his substantive position is that we should therefore stop funding Zelensky and the Ukrainians and stop sending them arms. We should have a ceasefire in which presumably Putin gets most of what he wants, and that's it, end of war. And again, the Republican Party, large sections of it are coming around to this position. It's not yet the formal position of the leadership. Mitch McConnell is very bitterly opposed to that line. Kevin McCarthy, you never really know. Depends on, Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, and there was a rather not deeply unfair comment about him made by a colleague that if Kevin McCarthy's alone, does he exist? Meaning, the guy's very pliable and sticks his finger in the air to see which way the wind is blowing. The wind is going in a more Trumpian direction on Ukraine, and I think this indictment is problematic for for the Congress Party's continued funding of America's support for Ukraine.
Harry, I know you have to run to do what will likely be the first of 20 TV hits today. Let me ask you this last question, and then you can answer it briefly and then disappear, and Ed and I will wrap up. One viewer writes in, I've heard Trump in jail equals indignity, but isn't it possible that this is precisely what Trump wants? How better to mobilize his base than to be cuffed and placed behind bars? Won't he spin this as proof of a conspiracy against him? And let me just add, for everyone who doesn't know, and I'm sure there are plenty of Americans don't know, can you run for the presidency from the slammer, from jail?
Yeah. So like so much with Trump, it's this unknown, unprecedented situation. But I think the answer has to be yes. Think about the rights of the people. They could, as long as the person is 35 years old, et cetera, American born, as we know from how Trump first came to prominence with Obama, then I think the answer is yes. And look, he's been playing, is Brer Rabbit an American trope? I don't know,
yes,
but he's playing this, bring it on, I love it, it's great for me, that we would expect that no matter what. Possibly it's true, possibly it's false, as to this Klieg-like moment tomorrow where he is the very picture, literally, of a criminal. I just can't believe that's true of the slammer. I think of, the people looking at you 24 hours. I think of his hair. I think of all, everything that he attends him from the moment he wakes up when he wants it, and being instead in jail. I just think it's so debasing, such a come down. He does have this almost messianic kind of approach now, and martyrdom complex, and that's getting laid about as low as you can. It's his own sort of Via Dolorosa, we could say, but I just can't see it. Jail for Donald Trump is just a step too far, it seems to me, and a personal nightmare. And such a revealing, he comes out of jail to face the judge, whatever he looks like after 3 days in jail. Not where he wants to be, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Ed, for being with me. So I am jumping off.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us, Harry.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Ed, we've had the last question. We've had 2 years of, relative calm in Washington, and not quite in the country at large, where the culture wars continue. But are we facing now another 2 years of all Trump all the time? It seems like, if anything, we're kind of entering a phony war period, to use a good British analogy, because it will be quite a while before these trials happen. That's just the way Western legal systems work.
Yeah, and Trump's, a past master at sort of gaming the legal system and delaying and filing motions to change jurisdiction and all this stuff. So this could be prolonged and prolonged beyond the next election. I think the likeliest scenario is, we get an indicted but not necessarily convicted Trump on the ballot this time next year. So it's a long game. And there are many strands to this and many potential indictments. We're going to get a lot more Trump. I mean, in terms of his arraignment tomorrow, I believe that the plans are not to release the mugshots. You got them standing one side, then the other, and then head on. But the Trump campaign desperately want to get hold of those mugshots and turn them into election campaign T-shirts. Trump wants to be the Messiah, the victim of conspiracy, the persecuted. And that would just be the perfect kind of Trumpian branding. So don't be surprised if that's gone iconic before the end of the week.
Okay, well, more cheerfulness for all of us. Ed Luce, I really want to thank you for joining us. This has been fascinating. And I really do appreciate it that you did this on such short notice. And I look forward to getting you to Berlin to talk about it in at greater length and more comfortable non-Zoom settings. But many, many thanks for doing this today. And I hope you find plenty of other stories to report on and that your editors will be interested in other than Trump in the next couple of years.
I share that, and a delight to be on. Thank you so much for having me. That was a very enjoyable session.
We look forward to seeing you again on Academy Zooms of our programs from Berlin. And thank you very much, all of you, for joining us today.